Hello and welcome to California CEO Magazine at californiaceo.net. I'm Jeff Allen. You know, we're all familiar with the old cliche, great leaders are not made, they're born. But my guest on this segment might have something to say about that. His name is Ray Anderson. Some of you might already be familiar with Ray. He is the owner and president of Anderson Business Coaching and founder of a series of programs, both online and in person, based on the principles of good-hearted leadership. And we're going to talk to him today. And Ray, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
You, Jeff. Thank you so much.
You bet. Ray, you have been in the business of helping leaders, of helping and not just leaders, but employees too, improve the way that they conduct themselves both at home and in business, and help them just kind of improve their lives overall, success in business. But you yourself have a great story, obviously. Let's learn a little bit about you, because we've got a lot of things we want to cover today, but let's find out a little bit about Ray Anderson and some of the things that kind of got you to where you are.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, and I put together this program, Good Heart Leadership. It's not kumbaya, it's money in the bank, in part because I think there is this notion out there that good heart leadership is a moral issue as opposed to a financial one. And for me personally, my story goes back too many years to count, but I'll go back to Vietnam, where I served back in the late 60s. And the point in this is that while I was there, I learned a lot about leadership and how to apply it. And many of those principles came from my dad. I was born in Germany. And in 1951, my dad came back to Germany to pick up my mother, myself, and my stepbrother. Now, I bet you can count on one hand the number of people who are soldiers in the war in World War II who returned to pick up their offspring, and there were a lot of them left over from, as you might suspect. So my dad kind of set the tone for what leadership was, and that it was commitment and it was important. And so when I was getting ready to go to Vietnam, I was not particularly fond of the war, but the truth was that, I knew I had to make a decision. I had been drafted because I had fooled around in college, like maybe some of us had done at that point. And I told him, I said, Dad, what do you think? Should I go or what? And he said, son, sometimes it's not enough to just do your duty. You got to do what's right. And he said, you may not particularly like to go, but at this point, follow your heart. And so I went. That experience in Vietnam, as some might suspect, it's not something I'd wish on anybody else. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was a turning point in my own growth. And as a 21-year-old, I learned a lot. And so part of the leadership principles came out of that experience. And from that point, my goal was to say, how can I help those who I ran into? And I had a lot of experiences from there. It seemed to me it was always weird that people's potential was tremendous, but how they applied it was weird, including my own. And I think, a lot of us use our own experience to say, what is it that we can do to become more effective leaders? So I'm more of the mind that circumstance creates leadership as opposed to a birthright. Is it true that some of us have stronger leadership skills than others? I would have to say that's true. But my experience working in business, people of a variety of styles, different ways of approaching business, some are very successful that you would never think could be successful. And a lot of it has to do with their ability to bring out the best in people and then manage things so they can get the best out of their business at the same time.
And some people are, counter to that, successful in spite of themselves, and you don't know whether those are the people that you want to be lined up with or not. But let's talk about, let's kind of key in on some of those principles, Ray, that really help to define the good-hearted leaders. What are some of those principles that you can share with us that we can look and we can identify real-world principles that we can look at and say, yeah, this person, he's or she's got them?
Right. Well, typically when we start this, we believe that there are 5 principles that are connected to good heart leadership. And I mean, these are things that you see in theological works and any good business works, in good government works, and they're almost identical. And I'll try to go over them. And I'm going to look at this because I think it'll help. But the first is a shared vision, and it astounds me how often, as I work inside of organizations, while people are well intended about the vision, it sometimes very seldom gets beyond the top of it. We use a video called Survival Run, and it's got a great scene in it. The purpose of this is it's a sighted and a blind man going through the Dip Sea Run in Marin County. And literally the run is 7.5 miles over a mountain range ending at the Pacific Ocean. But the truth is, it's a blind man. And the sighted man is guiding through some very tough terrain. And as they're reaching the crest, and there's a beautiful meadow, and you can see some of the people are walking off on a shortcut because they can. But these two can't because the shortcut's too narrow. Mm-hmm. So they're going along, and this blind guy says, "Harry, what's the view like?" And Harry says, "Wow, you should see it. It's spectacular." And many times I'm working in organizations, the front line are blind. They have no idea where we're going, what's going on, and so they make a lot of mistakes, and then they're punished for it because they're blind. They have no idea where they're going. So shared vision is extremely important, and it usually isn't done very effectively. The second thing that I see is relevant skills. And the point is that we in America typically have a training philosophy that can be summed up this way. It's kind of like teaching somebody to ride a bicycle and starting off by putting them on the 10 freeway. You stand behind them, you kick the bicycle and say, "Okay, I've taught you how to ride, now good luck." And they're going off down the freeway like this. And then we wonder why they're not doing what they need to. So relevant skills are really, really important. And in most cases, we don't do a very effective job of training them where we want them. Third item that I think is important is meaningful incentives. And we know from research, it's not money. Money is a very poor motivator over a long period. It can motivate for a month or two, but pretty soon people are saying, "Where's more money?" But what I see, and it goes back to the shared vision, nobody lets them know what's going on. Mm-hmm. How about a thank you? How about one of the recommendations we make is catch people doing something right. Because the management philosophy in America is, if you see your boss coming down the hallway, your first thought isn't, "Oh boy, I did something right." Your first thought is, "Oh my God, what did I do?" And so what we want to do is catch them doing something right. Appropriate resources. And here, we're talking about significant issues of support, but I can give you a simple story that's kind of amusing. I was working inside of a large manufacturing facility that was producing an enormous amount of stuff with a very small staff. And part of the challenge was it was messy. It was very messy. And there's a big sign on the wall that said, "Cleanliness is important to safety." And I looked around and I said, "Well, guys, why don't you sweep this up?" And they looked at me and said, "We don't have a broom." So, sometimes you have to go and ask people, and what I'm finding is that there is this disconnect between the top and the bottom, and many times they don't get the information they need. And the final one here is fearless feedback. The idea being that most of the management communication that I'm familiar with intimately, because I've been a laborer, I've been a frontline soldier, etc., is top down. And the real important thing even in Vietnam, if my lieutenant got shot and killed, we were trained to be able to pick up his role instantly. We were trained. And so we had to be able to give feedback very quickly, And so one of the things we look at is in many organizations, feedback is very difficult. First of all, there's no mechanism for it. And when there is, typically it's misconstrued. So those are the 5 principles.
So why do you think that is? I mean, feedback, we all give feedback. I mean, we give feedback at the basis, the most basic levels to our pets. If they do something good, they sit. We provide them, with a good rover, and we give them a treat. We provide feedback to our kids when they've done a good job on their tests or their homework. We should be doing that. Mm-hmm. Why is it that positive reinforcement in the workplace is so difficult, both to give as a leader and then to actually to receive? What is it about the workplace that makes that such a rare thing indeed to have?
There are a number of factors, and because I've been doing this so long, I've seen it. And part of my role is to be a neutral third party, And the way I describe this, I don't have a dog in the fight usually, so I'm able to ask hard questions that sometimes the dynamics of the relationships are difficult. And one of the challenges, I'm going to approach this from 2 different sides. One is the owner sometimes doesn't realize he's king. And here's what I mean by that. He just thinks, "Hey, I'm one of the guys." Just like Prince Henry says, "I'm just one of the guys." Well, he's not. He's an owner. And the truth is, whether he's the most benevolent person in the world or he's a dictator, he's still the king. And so people have a tendency to tell him or her what he wants to, they want to tell him, right, what he wants to hear. And so as a consequence, I find many times executives making decisions based on partial or bad information. And none of this is malicious. It's just people are trying to feed him information in order to protect themselves sometimes, to give him what he thinks he needs, etc. So that's a barrier that we need to help them understand, that being the king has certain things that they have to work at to be able to build out. The second thing that I find, and we use assessments, both organizationally and individually for a specific reason. There are lots of good assessment tools, so the type I use happens to work for us, but there are others. But the point is that our style frequently affects communication. As an example, Thoreau once said, "Who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear a word you're saying." And so because they're the king and because of their style, and because some people don't like confrontation, they won't tell a person what they need to tell them. So my point is that there are a lot of dynamics that occur that prevent feedback from getting to where it needs to go, which enables the company to make better decisions. Better decisions yield to more money. And so we have a whole process that's designed to take that good heart leadership principle and end up putting it at the bottom line. And that's principally the purpose.
And another, possibly another reason is people are so busy today, and it's taken for granted. I think that maybe some leaders just think, well, my employees are doing what they're supposed to do, and so because I expect that, and they expect that, they know exactly what their roles are in the job, that everybody's happy as long as I give them a paycheck at the end of the day, and they come back to work next week. Everybody's good. But let me ask you a question, Ray. I'm a sports fan, and I tend to follow talk radio quite a bit. And one of the things you hear from time to time is you'll hear the sports experts talk about the value of a manager or a coach in that particular sport and how important a role they play actually at the end of the day in terms of the results, whether it be for the game at the end of the season and standings, seeing a team go into a championship. One sport, basketball, has seen some great coaches, some great head coaches. Phil Jackson, of course, being one of the most recent. It seems like no matter what he did with the Lakers, even though he had maybe a team or two that really shouldn't have won the final championship, they ended up doing that, and he led them in Chicago Bulls, of course, with Michael Jordan, and he's just has his legacy. So basketball being one, maybe even football another, where the coach is kind of identified with the team and has led them on to championships. Baseball is one where you hear, well, there's 25 guys, and the manager doesn't really play a big role, and there's never really been a history of truly great managers that just have this amazing track record with lousy or mediocre employees. So my question is this, and getting to the point, which side of the theory tends to be true? In business? Can a great team and the organization as a whole, perform well in spite of its leader? And are there a lot of instances of that happening from your perspective?
No, that's a very good question. So the point is that there are a lot of leaders out there that would not embody these principles in a way that I think would make best use of their staff. But if you've got a niche in the marketplace that is really very difficult for somebody to come into, you can still succeed, and you can succeed extremely well. But what I will tell you is this, and if this makes sense, Jeff, if you were to take in any business, in any industry, you can duplicate everything that a competitor has, with one exception, and that's the people. What our experience has been is that you take two people with the same business and you put their leadership principles side by side, the good-hearted leader will mostly do better financially than the guy who just says, hey, look, I'm paying these guys, get out of my way, here's what we need to do. But I want to touch a little bit on what you said that I think is really endemic in America today. We forget that, we really work harder than almost any people in the Western civilization. By that I mean hours. 50 to 60 hours in the executive suite is probably low. It's probably more like 70 or 80. And in that, what I find, and I remember a CEO who was running a $100 million company, said to me, he says, Ray, if you come in and you give me one more thing to do, or you take up one more hour of my time, we're probably going to have a hard time getting started. So the issue of busyness is a function of what you're talking about. And I think in that busyness has a tendency to undermine communication, which exasperates a lot of the problems we have. So to answer your question, I think good heart leadership will still trump a bad leader, but it doesn't mean that a bad leader can't and won't have a very successful organization. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. If I'm a member of staff, I'm not a manager, but I follow these principles, these good-hearted principles, pardon me. Does that allow me to prepare or prepare me to deal with managers who may not be as effective and may not necessarily share these principles?
No, it does. You know, I've done a blog on, you know, when your dream job turns into a boss nightmare. And all of us have been there at one point or another. You know, maybe something changes, and you get a new boss, and you and that boss don't click for whatever reason, and suddenly you're confronted with the fact, now what do I do? And my experience has been that you know, part of our role as subordinates is to be able to manage our boss. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way as much as I do, if I know your style, Jeff, if I know that, you know, you want things in very detailed writing and you want full explanations as to what's going on, or you want a big overview, it's part of my job is to be able to provide you with information that permits you to make decisions rather than do it from my perspective. And I think what we try to do in terms of management, and the reason we like assessment tools, if I know what your behavioral style preferences are, I can structure my communication to make the most advantageous use of your strengths and avoid, you know, putting you in a job in which you're weak. As an example, one of my experiences is that we'll take somebody who's a wonderful technician and decide, and one of the ways we reward people in America is that, you know, good heart leaders look for job fit. Other leaders say, well, we've got as far as we can with technician, we're going to make them a supervisor. And the truth is those skill sets are 180 degrees out. And a year and a half later, they fire the technician because he's a horrible supervisor. So, you know, part of what our job is to be able to look as executives and try to figure out where best do our people fit, and then put them into a job that fits their strengths and shore up their weaknesses, as opposed to letting them sink. And that goes back to relevant skills, appropriate resources, and all the things I talked about.
But see, in what this does is this kind of answers I think the question that a lot of people have out there. Okay, well, Ray is talking about a lot of nice, feel-good things. You know, it's nice to, even the words good-hearted. People don't necessarily associate that with an effective leader or with money in the bank. And your slogan, you know, you've got a slogan here, you know, it's not kumbaya, it's money in the bank. But it is true that, you know, from what you're saying, then you can have your heart in the right place, and because you have your heart in the right place and you do things in a way that's good for people, it's good for the organization, good for the community, that actually does translate to the bottom line, then, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. So the example that might help illustrate the point here for you, Jeff, is that, you know, I was working inside of a plant, and the plant manager was one of the best I'd ever worked with. And he had everything tracked in numbers that permitted him to really manage the plant in a very effective way. One of the challenges, he was spending $500,000 a year on liquid waste. And we had discovered a little anomaly that was about 450 gallons, and he was unconvinced that we had actual numbers because he said, we track everything. I don't understand where this is coming from. So in looking through it, we discovered that what was happening is that the floor was literally taking the mop water and putting it in the liquid waste at the cost of $1.50 a gallon. And that was ultimately coming to an average about 450 gallons a week. He just didn't believe it. He said, they've been trained not to do this. I don't understand how they could, this is impossible. And we just happened to be walking out on the floor, and lo and behold, you know, the janitor is walking by, and he kind of gives a wave, and he dumps his bucket into the liquid waste. And I remember the plant manager's jaw just dropping. And he was just shocked. But the point is that everybody had to learn from one another. And sometimes, because there wasn't adequate training, they thought this was appropriate, and they've been doing it for years. That one act of finding that out saved them $200,000. And my experience is in almost every plant I've ever been, because when people aren't engaged at a level where they can really make a contribution, they do the best they can. And many times I find what they do is they come in, they turn their brain off, They punch in, and then when they leave, they punch out and they turn their brain back on because they feel like nobody wants to hear what I have to say anyway. So it has a huge impact.
So it's a great illustration there, and really does draw our attention to really what we're trying to accomplish here. The bottom line is good-hearted leadership. It's all about creating more effective leaders, good-hearted leaders. That spreads to the employees, to the staff. It involves everybody, and that ends up resulting in more money in the bank. At least that's the idea, and that's what you talk about. Can you give us maybe some examples of some good-hearted leaders today? Maybe people that we recognize, or people that we should probably know or look up.
Well, I'll do two things. One, if I can, what I'd like to do is Jim Collins wrote a great book called Good Great. And in that, he identified a level 5 leader. And what was interesting about that, we think of the charismatic types, the Steve Jobs, and all those guys who are dynamic and out in front of the public. And and the truth is, what Jim Collins found is that a level 5 leader is literally a person who doesn't really care much about the limelight. His focus is on what's going to be best for the organization. I had the pleasure of working with Nokia when it was going through its best times, 91 to 2000. And that leader was more interested in what would happen to make the organization better than his own particular ego and what he wanted to accomplish. So those are important things, and they understand that people will ultimately make the difference, as I was saying. And if I can, I wanted to illustrate what's the difference. People say, well, who cares, and does it really hit the bottom line? Right. And I'll give you, if I can, 5 examples of what I've seen in reactive leaders over the course of my work. Sure. that instead of drawing the best out of people, which is what we really want to do, because my experience, they may not be well trained, they may not be the most educated, they may not be the most intelligent, but my experience is frontline workers have the solution to 90% of the problems that the organization suffers at any given time. They just don't feel like they're free to do them. And what happens, my experience, when you have a reactive leader, and I've seen lots of them, including myself once in a while. I mean, I've had kids like you have, and it's difficult. The first one I found, and I've had a couple of examples of this, what they do to people when they're reactive and they're hard on them is legally indefensible. And what I mean by that, I can remember one particular context. We had a floor supervisor who really was almost diabolical. It would be the easiest way to define that. We know at one point he took a knife to somebody's throat. Another occasion, he did something else. The plant manager continued to say, well, we really need him. I think he's really important here. But the truth is, everybody learned to play him like a fiddle. And they would look for opportunities to make him angry, to push him aside because they could. And instead of that energy going into the bottom line, it was literally games playing inside. And the point is that if it had gone to court, everybody would have been in trouble. So legally indefensible is one thing. The second thing that I find, they have a tendency to start conversation that ends all conversation. We talk about fearless feedback. The guy who comes in and says, this is the way it's done. Do you understand? Yeah, okay, no problem. And so the point that we were making earlier, all the creative energy, all the potential for saying, hey, let's talk and have a dialogue about this, let's see what we can do, all the good ideas evaporate in that comment. Third thing that I find is that they typically get defensive. We could be doing this better, and they go, well, who are you to tell me that? Do you know who I am? And so we have both sides of that. One is the king doesn't realize his power. The other one is he says, that's who I am, and this is what you have to do. Next one is they create a cycle of incompetence. And what happens is that people just get into the point where I know I have solutions. I brought them up 4 times. I'm not bringing them up again. And so we keep doing the same thing over and over, that old notion of insanity. They are clueless sometimes about the impact of their behavior. They get so sucked into it. I can remember one guy telling me, he'll yell at me for 5 minutes, and 10 minutes later he's forgotten about it. And I chew on it for 3 days. Now, can you imagine the damage that does to productivity when people are kind of gnawing on something somebody said to them or something they did? So, that's another impact. And all these cost money.
So let's talk a little bit then, Ray, about what you do and about how you can help people become better leaders, become the good-hearted leaders that can result in that money in the bank that we've talked about. What do you do? What's your role, and how do you work with businesses?
Well, and I'll go back to the point that I think really makes a lot of sense. First of all, we have what we believe is a very good course called Good Heart Leadership, and it's broken into leadership and transaction. So when you look at leadership is about transformation of the organization and the people in it, bringing out the best in them. The management side is about transaction, making sure that every transaction is 100% correct. And there's a combination of things, but people tend to muddy them up. Good heart leadership is about the transformational side. Transactional side, if you do an effective job, you can draw people in and you can really, really make a difference. So part of what we do is when we go through the class is we help them understand their behavioral style. We partner them up with somebody who's different so they begin to appreciate, as an example, somebody who's really detail-oriented and slow to get angry and wants to take a lot of time and doesn't want change. And you get somebody like me who's excitable and wants to make something happen. We don't plan on that. What happens over time, those become very corrosive things, and people start to get into cliques. And instead of realizing that we need the differences are what make the organization strong. And when they become respectful of that, it would be like me saying, I don't understand why you got blue eyes, Jeff. What the hell's the deal with that? Seriously, it's like sometimes our behavioral style is as much a part of our personality as your eye color. And so the more we respect that and understand that, we can use that as a lever to grow the organization. And so we work real diligently on that. The second thing, as I told you earlier, is that I'm neutral. I mean, I typically have no dog in the fight. So because I'm not tied up in the internal politics, I can actually ask questions and get dialogue going that nobody else can. In that regard, I'm kind of a therapist, if it makes sense. So what we want to do, and here's the point, most of what's accomplished inside of life, inside of our families, inside of businesses, is through conversation. And when you engage people in conversation and give them an opportunity to give feedback, at first tentatively, they start opening up. They start saying, well, I did think of this solution. And then you give them an opportunity and make sure you implement it. And that's where I think we fail. It's interesting to me when you watch the Japanese, 90% of all suggestions are implemented because they think about the team. And here in America, it's 10%. So we want to open that door to engagement. And that's what we do. We pull people together. We pull communication into a loop so we get a unified vision. You get relevant skills. You get the things you need to be able to move the organization to the next level and save money and bring it to the bottom line where it can be used to help the employees instead of paying for insurance and paying for all of the other things like liquid waste. So
there are a couple of different components, obviously, to what you do. You've got some video components that are involved where you provide videos for people to take a look at online. They can see these. And then you've got the workshops also that you schedule throughout the course of the year, and you work throughout Southern California. There are people out there right now probably saying, I need to learn a little bit more about Ray Anderson. What makes the guy go? What can they do? Where can they go? And where can they find you?
Well, they can call me at 951-634-6714. That's my phone number, my cell. They can also go to our website, andersonbusinesscoaching.com, or they can go to goodheartleadership.com. Both of them have access to free videos so they can get a taste for the course without having to go through it. And it gives them a sense as to what they can expect. And for this particular show, I'm giving a discount, so that might be of some value too.
And you've got also, too, a podcast, webcast coming up, too, Good Hearted Leadership,
yes,
which people can find as well, and they can find out from you as well by getting on that email list and tracking you down there. Ray Anderson, it's been nice to have you. Ray Anderson, Anderson Business
Thank you so
Coaching.
much.
You bet. That wraps up this segment of California CEO. Thanks again to my guest, Ray Anderson of Anderson Business Coaching and Good Hearted Leadership. He's been my guest today. If you'd like to join us here in studio to talk about your business, you can give us a call. We're at 951-697-3098. Or you can just complete and submit the online form below. To view the show again or any of our other segments, visit us 24/7 at CalForniaCEO.net, where you can also watch us on your iPad, smartphone, tablet, or other mobile device. And don't forget to connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google+. My name is Jeff Allen. Thanks again for joining us on California CEO Magazine. It's good to have you, and we'll talk to you again soon.